The US Supreme Court has handed victory to President Trump by partially allowing his temporary ban on travellers from 6 mainly Muslim-majority countries to come into effect. The justices will now consider in October whether the policy, which bans citizens for 90 days and refugees for 120 days, should be upheld or struck down. Mr. Trump says the ban is needed for national security, despite criticism that it is in violation of the US Constitution. Well, our correspondent Anthony Zurcher is in Washington for us. Anthony, this has been an ongoing tussle between Mr. Trump and the courts, so bring us up to speed.
All right, well, what the Supreme Court justices said was that the ban could go into effect for individuals in those 6 countries and refugees who did not have bona fide relationships with the United States. Now, the court described a bona fide relationship as, say, having family members already in the United States, to have some sort of an employment agreement with a company based in the United States, or to have an education agreement, a scholarship or admission into U.S. school. So, say if you were living in Iran and you were a student coming over to the U.S., you had already been admitted to a school in the U.S., you could still enter into the country. The ban didn't apply to you. But for everyone else in those 6 countries and individuals who had been granted even refugee status and had already been vetted, the court justices said that Donald Trump can essentially close the borders to them during what they said would be a 90-day review process. And all of this then goes on to next autumn, when the Supreme Court will take a closer look at this case on its merits.
So why the change now, given that initially this ban was knocked back?
Well, this was the first chance for the Supreme Court to take a look at it. And if you looked at the lower court opinions, it's interesting. These court justices at the appellate level, they looked a lot at the religious discrimination they saw in the ban. They said that it discriminated against Muslims. They looked at Donald Trump's tweets. They looked at his speeches. They looked at his surrogate statements. The Supreme Court justices didn't pay any attention to that whatsoever. They looked at existing statute and presidential power, and they said that in areas of national security, the president has sweeping powers, and that the interests in preserving the country, protecting the country, outweigh any concerns of individuals abroad who do not have real ties to the U.S.
So now 6 countries whose citizens are going to be, one could say, inconvenienced, if that's not too weak a word. Any response yet from those countries?
No response yet. It'll be interesting to see how the Trump administration implements this, how the lower courts interpret bona fide relationships. It's a little vague, the Supreme Court ruling. Leaves some flexibility what exactly constitutes a bona fide relationship. So, students can come in, but there's no guarantee of what type of students, what sort of schools they're going to. So I think we're going to have to wait to see how all of this plays out. The Trump administration has said that within 72 hours of court decision, they were going to re-implement the travel ban. So I think you're going to see them act fairly quickly.
OK. Anthony Zurcher, thanks very much.
News right now. So the Supreme Court just ruling that President Trump's travel ban can go into effect. This is that controversial ban restricting travel on 6 Muslim-majority nations. This allows them to keep enforcing it while the case is litigated. It is a major victory for the president. It was actually only Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor who sided with the groups that were challenging the revised order. We'll bring you all developments in this story as it happens. Wow. That is a big deal.
That is a big one. It's a full effect, the travel ban. All right.
we're currently in the third different version of this travel ban, which was originally the first version was brought in by the Trump administration via an executive order signed by President Trump all the way back in the first week of his administration back in January. Now, this third version of this travel ban had been partially blocked by several courts in the United States because of an issue over this whole concept of bona fide connections to the United States. Essentially, some federal courts here in the US partially blocked this third travel ban, saying that people who could prove a bona fide, a strong connection to somebody already in the United States would be exempt from this travel ban. What the US Supreme Court have just ruled in the last hour or so, announcing their ruling, they're now saying that this travel ban can now take effect in full. That exemption in terms of that bona fide connection will now be lifted, and this ban can now take effect in full, while some of those legal challenges are still working their way through the courts.
How big of a win is this for the Trump administration, given the challenges of the entire first year in office?
Well, this is certainly a major victory for the Trump administration. This ruling, as I was saying, it's still temporary, so there are still some legal challenges which will slowly work their way through the courts. Really, legal experts here in Washington reacting to this ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court. They've been saying that this ruling, it was 7 Supreme Court justices to 2. They're saying that this indicates that really the U.S. Supreme Court will eventually lift all exemptions onto this travel ban, and that will eventually take effect completely, not partially in any way. So it's certainly a major victory for the Trump administration. Reaction is still very much coming in, but I think in the coming hours we can expect to see a lot of condemnation of this decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, by Democrats, for example, the opposition in the U.S. Congress and Donald Trump's political opposition, as well as civil rights groups and civil liberties groups who've really condemned each and every version of this travel ban as and when it's come into effect.
Which kind of brings me to my next point, Giles, which is Chad, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen. Why these countries?
Well, the Trump administration's argument overall is essentially that these countries don't have the visa processes, they don't have adequate vetting inside their airports, for example, and their visa processes to stop dangerous individuals, potentially dangerous individuals, traveling to the United States and then causing some sort of harm against American citizens. That's been the Trump administration's argument all along. We have seen some countries actually taken out of these travel bans. Sudan, for example, the United States ruled a few months ago that their processing, their vetting systems were sufficient to allow them to come off a later version of the travel ban, having been put on a previous one. Really, the critics of the Trump administration have said that this is not about vetting, this is not about processes, this is about religion. Of course, we saw Donald Trump make those very controversial comments when he was still a candidate running for the U.S. presidency, talking about bringing in an entire Muslim ban. So that's been the criticism all along against the Trump administration, calling this a Muslim ban rather than a travel ban.
Breaking news out of the United States. Let's get back to that. The Supreme Court is now allowing the full enforcement of U.S. President Donald Trump's travel ban. The president will now be able to restrict entry for people from 6 Muslim-majority countries, even if they've got a relationship with somebody in the United States. Maryam Sadiq is my guest, a volunteer attorney with the Dulles Justice Coalition. Maryam, good to have you here with us. What do you make of this this decision?
Well, we know it just came out a few minutes ago, so I had a chance to scan it. And actually what it says is it stays the injunction from the 4th and the 9th Circuit decisions. So for your Canadian viewers and listeners, you know, our courts are divided up into various circuits. Each circuit has the opportunity to make its own decisions based on cases that are brought before it. The 4th and 9th Circuits had both said that the implementation of this last travel ban was going to be stayed. And the Supreme Court said, we're not going to stay it. You are allowed to go through and implement the travel bans until the 4th and the 9th Circuits make their decisions and their final orders on this. So this isn't the end of the road by a long shot for those of us fighting this discriminatory ban.
And for people who come from these countries, what's it going to mean in the short term, Maryam?
It's probably not terribly different from what it's meant since the beginning of this fight. You know, we had a pretty long reprieve from any sort of travel ban, but visa issuance has slowed down drastically for everybody, not just for people from these various countries. So, you know, the hardship is definitely still there, and they're going to be prohibited from coming in. But I think that the slowdown has already occurred. We just haven't been seeing much of it, and we won't see as much of it as we did, say, for example, in January, through the initial travel ban.
Do you think the Trump White House, Miriam, is going to characterize this as a clear victory?
Absolutely. 100%. But if you actually take what they got versus what they were asking for, it's maybe 1/15 of what they were looking for at the beginning. But yes, the Trump administration classifies, they have a wonderful way of spinning everything in their favor.
Miriam, great to have you with us for immediate reaction to this story. We'll keep our eye on it. Thank you.